You wake up on a cold September morning in 1943 in a boarding house room in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and you do not know yet that the letter under your pillow is from a man who is already dead. You are 24 years old. Your name is Lucy Hargrove. You have been on the Rivet line at the Ford Willow Run bomber plant for 14 months. Your husband, Wendell, is a radio man on a Navy cruiser in the South Pacific. His last letter to you is dated the 12th of August. It is 28 days old this morning, and it is in the breast pocket of the coveralls hanging over the back of the chair. You read it every night before you sleep. What you do not know, on this 9th of September of 1943, is that the cruiser, the USS Helena, went down off the Solomons 2 months ago. You do not know that the Navy chaplain with your telegram is already on his way south from Detroit. You do not know that the bomber whose fuselage skin you will rivet today, Liberator 42-7456, will fall in flames over the Balkans before the leaves turn. All you know is that the radio at the boarding house came on 6 minutes past 5, the way it always did, and that the bomber bus to the plant leaves the corner of Ballard and Forest at 5:50, and that on Bench 7 Star at Department D this morning, you have 1,240 rivets to drive into a B-24 between 6 and 3 with a 30-minute break. This is the day I'm going to walk you through. 9th of September, 1943. Lucy Hargrove pushed the blanket off her shoulder and lay for a second in the dark, listening to the floorboards of the rooming house tick as the radiators came up. The window over her cot was open 4 fingers wide. The September air coming through it smelled the way September air in Ypsilanti always smelled in those years. Coal smoke from the Michigan Central yards, river fog off the Huron, and underneath both of those, even at 5 in the morning, the burnt aluminum smell from the plant at the end of the Willow Run road. Once you worked there, you could smell it inside your sweater after washing. WJR Detroit was on the Philco, 50,000 watts, the early morning newsreader from the network, the kind of flat-voiced man who told you the war 1 cigarette commercial at a time. North of Salerno, the Fifth Army had broken out of the beachhead. In the Solomons, a transport had gone down in the night. He did not say which transport. They never said which transport. She sat up. Her hands hurt in the small joints, the way they did every morning now. Drill press at first, then bucker on the wing rib jig, and since March on a hydropneumatic riveter at Department D. Final assembly, Section 2. Fuselage skin, starboard. The pain in the knuckle of her right index finger was a deep one. The doctor at the company clinic had called it housemaid something and given her 2 aspirin and told her there was a war on. I want to say her name carefully. Lucy Hargrove is a composite, drawn from 3 WPA narratives recorded in Tennessee in the late 1930s, from the interviews Studs Terkel was gathering for what would become The Good War, and from the wartime diary of a riveter named Ada Burnett, whose pages are now at the Bentley Historical Library at Michigan. Every period detail, every wage, every shift change, every part number is as the surviving records show it. The dialogue is reconstruction in the spirit of what these women said when they were finally asked. She washed her face at the basin. Cold water. The hot tap on the second-floor bathroom was reserved for the night shift coming off at 7, and only for 10 minutes. Mrs. Brenneman had taped the rule to the mirror in pencil. Lucy did not mind. The cold woke her up enough to remember to put the kerchief on before she put the lipstick on. Because the lipstick, on her cheekbones, the foreman noticed, and the kerchief he didn't. The kerchief was navy blue with small white anchors, a 15-cent thing from the Kresge's on Michigan Avenue. She tied it the way the Office of War Information posters told you to tie it, low across the forehead, knotted at the nape. Her hair, which had been long the day Wendell shipped out in 42, was now cut at the jawline. Long hair in the plant was dangerous. A girl in Department C had gone into the wing spar jig last Christmas, and the company doctor had pulled her hair out of the rivet gun in pieces. They did not say her name on the loudspeaker. They never said names on the loudspeaker, but everybody in B shift knew which girl, and after that, everybody cut their hair. She came downstairs at 20 past 5. Mrs. Brenneman was at the table by the kitchen window with the coffee, and the coffee was the bad kind, the chicory kind, the kind you got under the ration book after the J stamps ran out for the month. 2 slices of bread cut thin, margarine, not butter, a jar of last summer's preserves from a Lapeer County orchard, a thin yellow jam that tasted of nothing in particular. Mrs. Brenneman's son Wallace was at Camp Pendleton in California, waiting for a transport ship of his own. There was a photograph of him on top of the icebox in a private first-class uniform. "You sleep?" Mrs. Brenneman said. "Some." "He right?" "Not since the 12th of August." Mrs. Brenneman nodded. She did not say what she was thinking, because they had agreed early on, in May or June, that there were certain things they would not say to each other at this kitchen table. The radio in the parlor said something about a Liberty ship at the Kaiser Yards in Richmond, California, going down the launching way at 5 days, 17 hours. Mrs. Brenneman turned the volume down with the back of her wrist. The bus picked Lucy up at 5:50 on the corner of Ballard and Forest. It was a bomber bus, the Willow Run Defense Lines, run by Greyhound under federal contract, painted khaki with a single white star on the door. The driver, a man named Earl who had a son in the 8th Air Force flying out of Polbrook, England, knew the names of every woman who got on at every stop. He nodded to Lucy. She took the second seat behind him because the second seat behind him was where Ruby Lofton always sat. Ruby was already there, in the dark, with the smell of Lifebuoy soap and Pall Mall cigarettes around her lunch pail on her lap. Ruby was 41 years old. She had been a telephone operator in Lima, Ohio before the war. Her son Carl had landed on New Georgia on the 2nd of July, and she had not had a letter from him since the 12th of August either. That fact, the 12th of August, bound her to Lucy in a way that nothing else did. Both of them had stopped at the same wall on the same day, and they were both still standing at it. "You eat?" Ruby asked. "Toast. You should eat the egg powder. You're getting thin." "I'll get the egg powder at the cafeteria." "You won't." "I will." Ruby looked at her sideways and didn't argue, because she knew Lucy wouldn't, and Lucy knew that Ruby knew. The bus pulled out from Forest Avenue onto the new 4-lane road they had punched through the cornfields in 1941 to feed the plant. 41,000 workers a day used this road by September of 43. The headlights of the bomber buses went all the way back to the courthouse in Ypsilanti, 20 buses deep, every morning at the same hour. From the air, it must have looked like a column of fireflies. From inside the bus, it just looked like the back of the bus in front of you. Earl turned the bus radio on for the last 12 minutes of the drive, because that was when WWJ ran the war bulletin. A man read from a script in a flat newsroom voice. AB-17 had been lost over Stuttgart. The 8th Air Force was raiding from English bases. There was a footnote about liberators flying out of North Africa, the 9th Air Force, the B-24s, the ships that Lucy and Ruby and 40,000 others on 3 shifts built. The newsreader did not say which raid. He did not say how many. Ruby looked out the window into the dark and put her hand on the lunch pail. "You know what I told myself this morning?" she said. "I told myself, this is the day Carl writes. He'll write, yes." The bus came over the small rise on Eccles Road, where for 1 second you could see the whole plant laid out below you, all 5,000 feet of it. The longest factory building under one roof in the world that year. The cracking lights of the night shift coming down to the parking lots. The neon sign at Gate 4 that read, Ford Motor Company Willow Run Bomber Plant. A red light on top of the wind tower, blinking once a second for incoming aircraft. The white star of the bomber bus reflected for a moment in the long row of windows. Lucy felt her chest tighten in the way it always tightened at this turning, because the plant was the place where you stopped being a woman whose husband had not written since August 12th, and started being a riveter who had to put 1,240 rivets into a fuselage skin between 6 a.m. and 3 p.m. with a 30-minute break. The bus turned in at Gate 4. The badge man, an older fellow with one arm, waved them through with the hook. 6:08 a.m. The whistle for the morning shift change was set to go off at 6:30 exactly, and after that, the klaxon would sound at 6:31 and the line would start moving again. The B-24 they had stopped on at 3 the previous afternoon, Air Force serial number 42-7456, Liberator J model, painted in the dark olive drab the AAF still used in 43, was waiting on the assembly line 216 feet from where Lucy would clock in. She did not know its serial number. She would never know its serial number. None of them ever did. She did not know, that morning, getting off the bomber bus at Gate 4 at 6:09, with her lunch pail in her left hand and her badge in her right, that the USS Helena, on which Wendell Hargrove served as radioman second class, had been struck by 3 long-lance torpedoes in the early hours of the 6th of July off Kula Gulf in the Solomons, and that the telegram from the Navy Department would arrive at Mrs. Brenneman's house on Ballard Street 1 week from this morning. She did not know that the bomber whose skin she would close that day would be lost over the Balkans in the late autumn of 1943 with a pilot from Kentucky named O.D. McGurk. She did not know either of these things. And she clocked in at 6:14 and walked toward Department D as the lights of the long bay came on one by one ahead of her, and the morning of the 9th of September began. The klaxon at 6:31 was the loudest sound made by human beings in the state of Michigan in 1943. The men who tested it at installation in 1942 measured 116 decibels at 6 feet. By the time it reached Lucy at her station in Department D, 216 feet down the bay, it had attenuated to a brain-shaking 84. After it, the building began to hum in a particular way. 280 hydropneumatic rivet guns in Section 2 alone, plus the cyclic boom of the giant drop hammer back at Department B, plus the spar jig drills, plus the lift truck horns, plus the radios. Every station had a radio, set quietly under the dolly table, tuned to whichever station the foreman that day let you tune to. By Christmas, the company would forbid radios. In September, Foreman Halverson still allowed the network Big Band Hour, the one that ran a lot of Glenn Miller, because Miller was a captain in the Army Air Forces now, and that, somehow, made it patriotic. Lucy's station was Bench 7 Star, fuselage skin starboard, position 14 to 22 on the Longeron. The B-24, hull number 42-7456, was waiting for her on the dolly truck where the C shift had left it. More than 300,000 rivets in a B-24 Liberator. The Ford engineers like to give the number as 313,000. 300,000 spread across the whole airframe, across the 3 shifts, across the long L-shaped mile of the bay. A first shift riveter at one station put in between 1,200 and 2,100 per day, depending on station. Lucy's station, between February and June, averaged 1,340. The company tracked it on a chart in the foreman's cage. She did not look at the chart. The chart was for the men. I want to stop here for 2 sentences. I have been to the surviving Willow Run East Bay, the part that is now the Yankee Air Museum, twice, once in 2015 and once in 2022. The roof is still up, the bays are still painted the green they were painted in '42. An institutional government-issue green meant to be calming, which it is not. The bays are quiet now. When you stand in there, it is hard to imagine the noise. The veterans who came back for the 75th anniversary said it was the noise they could not forget. Not the work, not the pay, not the cafeteria food, the noise. She picked up the riveter. It was a Chicago pneumatic model CP-214, hydro pneumatic, intensified to 2,800 pounds per square inch at the upset, with the standard offset bullnose for fuselage skin work. It weighed 7 pounds 8 ounces and ran off a 1/4-inch line tethered to the overhead. You held it with your right hand on the trigger and your left hand braced on the dolly side. The bucker, Edith Salek, 20 years old, from a CCC family in Sault Ste. Marie, just hired out of a 6-week NYA training class at Wayne State, would be on the inside of the fuselage with the bucking bar, signaling through the skin with 1 rap for ready, 2 raps for stop. Lucy and Edith had been working together for 11 weeks. They had developed the kind of silence between them that you only get with someone you trust on the dangerous end of a tool. They worked the longeron seam from station 14 to station 22, 28 rivets per foot, 6 inches on center for the field, 2 inches on the corners. Solid aluminum alloy rivets driven into 2024 T3 aluminum alloy skin. The rivet alloy a softer 2117 that took the upset without cracking. Lucy held the gun at 90 degrees, dimpled, hammered, 3-second burst, 1-second pause for Edith's bucking, next hole. 1,340 rivets a day meant 1 every 20 seconds on average. But the average was a lie, because when you hit a clean run, the gun set 6 in a row in less than 30 seconds. And when you hit a bad rivet, you could lose 10 minutes pulling it out and re-drilling. At 9:20, she lost a rivet. The riveter had a tendency to overdrive on aluminum when the temperature came up in the bay, and the temperature in the bay came up after 10,000 bodies had been working for 3 hours. The CP-214 had a torque sensor that was supposed to cut out at upset, but the torque sensors at Willow Run in 1943 were not reliable. She felt the gun jump in her wrist a 16th of a second too long and saw the head of the flush rivet mushroom up against the aluminum instead of pulling flush. The rivet had cracked the skin around the hole, a hairline split running aft about a half-inch. "Edith, bad one. Station 18, position 3. 2 raps from inside. Then Edith's voice through the open hatch. "Mark it." Lucy marked it with the yellow grease pencil on her station card. The procedure was that you marked the bad rivet, the inspector walked by with the gauge, the rivet was drilled out, a new one driven, the inspector cleared it. The procedure was the procedure. But Lucy looked at the hairline split and remembered the morning class 3 months before, when the Ford technical training instructor, a man named Mr. Pavlik, had drawn on the board the way a cracked rivet hole, even after re-drilling, became a stress riser, especially around the longeron where the wing root spars came down through the fuselage. Mr. Pavlik had said, "It doesn't fail today. It fails 3,000 hours later, over Bremen, over the Romanian oil fields, over wherever." He had drawn a small, dotted line spreading away from the rivet hole, like a crack in glass, like an idea, like a death. Lucy circled the mark on her station card twice. She would tell the inspector twice. She would tell Halverson if she had to. The Liberator 42-7456 did not yet know it had been touched by Lucy Hargrove. It would never know. As best as I can reconstruct it from the ferry logs at the Air Force Historical Research Agency at Maxwell, it would be flown out of Willow Run in the second half of September, ferried through Davis-Monthan in Arizona a few days later, and assigned to one of the 9th Air Force heavy bomb groups operating that fall out of North Africa. At that point, the 389th and the rest of the Liberator groups were in the middle of moving from Benghazi up into Tunisia, and the paperwork from that month is, to put it gently, not all in one place. The records do not entirely agree on the ferry date. The ferry pilot's log says one day, the receipt at Davis-Monthan says the next. I'm inclined to trust the receipt. None of this was her business. All of it was her business. At 10 o'clock, the cafeteria klaxon sounded, a different note from the line klaxon. 25 minutes for first break. Lucy peeled off her safety goggles and walked the long way around because the long way around went past the matron's room, and the matron's room had a radio. The matron's room was a cinder block cube tucked between Bay D and Bay E, fitted out as a kind of women's lounge in February of '43 after the third strike threat over the missing latrines. They had finally built more latrines in March. The matron's room remained with 2 cots for women who fainted, a hot plate, a coffee urn the AAOWO had donated, a calendar from a Detroit funeral home, and the radio, a small Atwater Kent set with 1 good speaker. Ruby Lofton was already in there on the 2nd cot, smoking. She did not look up when Lucy came in. The radio was on, the Mutual broadcast at 10:05 from New York. The newsreader was a man named Cedric Foster. He was reading the noon Pacific Theater Roundup. Lucy stood by the doorway and listened the way you listen to a thing you do not want to hear, but cannot leave. Naval Department sources confirmed the loss of 2 destroyer escorts in the New Georgia campaign. Names are being withheld pending notification of next of kin. The action took place in late August. Survivors have been recovered. The department reports that combat losses for August on the Solomons line. Ruby ground the Pall Mall out in the lid of a Maxwell House can. Sit down, honey. It's a destroyer escort. Carl's on land. I know. And Wendell's on the Helena. The Helena's a cruiser. I know, Ruby said. Sit down. Lucy did not sit down. Lucy stood by the doorway with her safety goggles in her hand and the cracked rivet thing still going around the back of her mind, and she said, more to the cinder block than to Ruby, I keep doing the math, Ruby. I keep thinking, the boat's that fast. It should take that long from Pearl. The mailbag goes on, what, every Tuesday and Thursday? The last letter from the 12th. That's 28 days. That's nothing. That's nothing for the Solomons. He said himself in May the mail was running 35. I know. So it's nothing yet. It's nothing yet. Ruby looked at her for a long minute through the cigarette smoke, and the orange light glow of the radio dial. "You want to know what I do?" Ruby said. "I get up, I dress, I come here, I make rivets, I make my dinner. I write him a letter every night even though there's no address that works since they moved Marine 3rd off the beachhead. I do not think the long thought. I have learned not to think the long thought. The long thought is what eats you. The work is what saves you. Going home and sitting in that boarding house with no work, that is what eats women like us. That is the truth I have come to. We are keeping busy because the alternative is sitting alone with the not knowing. And the not knowing has teeth, Lucy. The not knowing has teeth." Lucy sat down on the other cot then. She put her safety goggles on the small enameled table between them. She did not cry. The matron's room rule, an unwritten one, was that you did not cry in the matron's room. There were 2 cots and a radio and a Maxwell House lid full of Pall Mall ash and 23 minutes left of the first break, and Lucy Hargrove and Ruby Lofton sat on those cots in the way the women had sat across the kitchen tables of America for as long as there had been America, while their men were out somewhere on the dark water or in the dark forest or in the dark hill. And they made the small talk that was not small at all, while the radio talked to itself in the corner, and out beyond the cinder block walls the giant L-shaped factory hummed in the way it hummed all day, all night, every night that fall. At 10:28, a man named Foreman Halverson walked into the matron's room, which men were not supposed to do, and said, "Hargrove, Section 2 is short, now." He did not say good morning. He did not say sorry. He said now, the way men said now in factories in the war. Ruby looked at Halverson the way a 41-year-old woman who had worked the Bell telephone switchboard at Lima, Ohio for 19 years, looked at men who said, now. Lucy stood up, picked up her safety goggles, and went. By 11:15, she was back on bench 7-star, and the gun was in her hand again, and the day was different. The morning shift in that bay always had a turn at about 11:15. When the early adrenaline left and the body remembered, it had to do this for 4.5 more hours. She felt the turn. She let the gun pull her wrist through the next sequence. Station 18, Position 3, the bad rivet, had been drilled out and redriven by the second shift Damon. The inspector, a 60-year-old retired Pratt & Whitney machinist named Clem, had passed it. The 42-7456 had moved 12 inches down the line in the time she was in the matron's room. The whole ship would clear Section 2 by 2:15. By Saturday afternoon, it would have engines. By Tuesday, it would be towed to the test field at Willow Run flight strip. By the 17th, it would be flown out by an Air Transport Command ferry crew. By the 2nd of October, now hold that. Hold the rivet gun in Lucy Hargrove's hand at 11:28 on the morning of the 9th of September, 1943. Hold it. And let me show you the other hand. 2 months and 3 days earlier, half a world away. At about 01:57 hours on the 6th of July, 1943, Kula Gulf, the USS Helena, light cruiser CL-50, was steaming north in column with the Honolulu, the St. Louis, and 4 destroyers, into what was about to become one of the most chaotic, close-range surface actions of the South Pacific War. Helena had won the previous engagement at Kula Gulf 5 nights before. Helena was a lucky ship. Helena's crew was a lucky crew. Her radio men worked 4-hour watches in the wireless shack just below the bridge, 3 of them on rotation, hands on the brass key, lights off, headphones on. The mid-watch radio man that night was Wendell Hargrove, radio man 2nd class, 26 years old, from Bedford County, Tennessee, husband of Lucy Hargrove, late of Department D Bench 7-star at the Willow Run bomber plant in Ypsilanti, Michigan. His hand was on the key. The finger pad of his right index finger pressed down on the polished brass ... of the carrier frequency. Like his wife's right index finger on the trigger of the Chicago Pneumatic 214, his right index finger had a small permanent groove at the joint, the mark of his trade. A few minutes later, the lookout in the foretop reported wakes in the water, Type 93 long lance torpedoes. Japanese destroyer Nizuki, leading destroyers Tanikaze and Suzukaze. Helena turned to port. She did not turn fast enough. The first torpedo took her in the forward magazine, the second amidships, the third in the stern. She broke in 3 sections within 90 seconds. Wendell Hargrove was in the wireless shack. The wireless shack was in the second section. Whether he reached the deck, nobody now living can say. Now bring the camera back to bench 7 star. Bring it back to 11:29 on the 9th of September. Lucy Hargrove's hand is on the trigger of the rivet gun, and her hand is steady. She does not know any of this. She does not know that Wendell stopped being a radio man 2 months and 3 days ago. She does not know that the long thought Ruby Lofton warned her about, the long thought that has teeth, is at this moment riding in a canvas mailbag on the back seat of a Ford coupe driven by a U.S. Navy chaplain named Lieutenant Junior Grade Earl P. Krause out of Detroit, headed south down U.S. Route 23 toward Ypsilanti. She does not know that, by the time the Liberator under her hands falls in flames somewhere over the Balkans in the late autumn, she will already be weeks into being a widow. She does not know that the Navy Department behind was the slowest department in the war for next of kin notifications, because most of the Helena's crew of 900 had been picked up by the destroyers Nicholas and Radford, and a portion lost on the islands of the Kula Gulf, and another portion missing, and the families would not be told until everything was sorted. She does not know that the letter from Wendell of the 12th of August, the last letter, had been written on the 17th of June and held in the censor's office in Pearl until the 4th of August. She is holding a letter from a man who is dead. She does not know this. She drives a Rivet at 2800 psi. The Rivet seat's clean. Edith taps twice. Next hole. At 12:30, she went to the cafeteria. The cafeteria served 11,000 meals per shift in those weeks. Tray, navy bean soup, 2 slices of war bread, a square of yellow margarine, a small dish of canned peaches, coffee. 18 cents. She sat at a women's table because the company had not segregated them, but the men's tables had segregated themselves by January of 43, and by September, the women had given up and made their own table. The talk at the table was small. Madge Pavlik, who was Mr. Pavlik, the instructor's cousin's wife, had bought a war bond for $10 at the Friday rally. Gracie Boudreau, who was Cajun French and worked bench 3 star, had had a letter from her brother in Saipan. The food was the same. The radio at the cafeteria, mounted high on the wall over the cashier, was playing a transcribed Glenn Miller American Patrol, and the trumpets came down through that big space and bounced off the tables and the trays and the 11,000 bowls of navy bean soup, and Lucy did not hear it. She thought about the rivet hole. She thought about the stress riser. She thought about Mr. Pavlik's chalk line on the blackboard, the small dotted lines spreading away from the rivet hole, like a crack in glass. She thought, I want to do this right, because somebody's son is in that ship. Somebody's husband is in that ship. Somebody's husband. At 2:15, the klaxon sounded the line move. The 42-7456 rolled forward 12 feet on its dolly. Edith and Lucy walked it down. The next ship rolled into Section 2 from upstream. The whole ship still to be skinned, fueled, wired, gunned. 1,268 rivets to go on this new one. Bench 7 star quota. The day was past its hump now. The afternoon at Willow Run had a particular quality. The fluorescence in the long bay hummed at 60 cycles. The light through the big East Bay clear-story windows came in shafts, full of metal dust. You could see the dust in the air all the way to the bay roof, 75 feet up. The dust got into your hair under the kerchief. It got into the small joints of your hands and made them ache the next morning. At 2:40, Halverson walked the line. The foreman at Willow Run that month had begun to walk the line because absenteeism in B shift had spiked to 14%. The official line was that the women were faking sick. The unofficial line, the line they did not put in the company memos, was that grief from the South Pacific had begun to reach the boarding houses of Ypsilanti and Wayne County, and the company did not have the language yet to call it what it was. Halverson stopped at bench 7 star. He did not look at Lucy. He looked at the station card with the yellow grease pencil circle on it twice. You marked station 18. I did. Clem passed it. He did. I told him I wanted it passed twice. He passed it twice. I want it in the book. Halverson took a pencil from his breast pocket and wrote his initials in the book and gave her the book back and did not look at her. You're doing good work, Hargrove. Thank you, Mr. Halverson. Carry on. He walked away. She picked up the gun again. The afternoon went. By 5:30, the second shift had begun to drift in past the time clocks. The 42-7456 had cleared bench 7 star and had moved into Section 3 for engine mount installation. Lucy had set 1,198 rivets that day, 90% of quota. The third shift Damon would finish for her. She washed her hands at the long trough sink. Cold water, Boraxo, gritty soap, the gray-blue paste that pulled the aluminum filings out of the small cracks in the skin of her hands, but never enough. The water in the trough turned silver from the dust. The line of women at the trough on either side of her did the same thing. They washed their hands in silver water. The bomber bus going east at 3:22 in the afternoon was a different animal from the bus going west at 6 in the morning. The morning bus was silent. The afternoon bus had a kind of low, rolling conversation in it, 2 by 2, in the seats, in the aisles, the women coming off shift with their kerchiefs untied and their lunch pails empty, and their faces marked at the cheekbones with the slow gray sediment of aluminum dust that all the cold water Boraxo in the trough sink could not get out. Earl was driving. Earl had been driving 16 hours straight on a swap with another driver who had pneumonia. Earl ran the radio low. WJR Detroit. The afternoon program was Stella Dallas. Ruby Lofton took the second seat behind Earl, as she did every afternoon. Lucy took the seat beside her. They did not talk for most of the way back. They had been talking in their way all day. By Eccles Road, the bus had a quiet over it, like the quiet that comes over a barn at dusk when the work is done and the animals know the work is done. At Ballard and Forest, the bus stopped and Lucy got off. Ruby got off 2 stops later, at the corner of Mason and Ferris, where the colored boarding house was that took Lima women. They had not said goodbye. They never said goodbye. They would see each other on the bus at 5:50 in the morning. She walked up Ballard Street in the afternoon September light. The maples on Ballard were beginning to turn. A boy on a bicycle delivered the Detroit Free Press, throwing it underhand at porches without slowing. The headline she could see from the curb on the front of one was about the Salerno landings. The subheadline was about a Navy press release. She did not stop to read it. She did not yet. Mrs. Brenneman was on the back porch shelling lima beans. There was a record on the Victrola from the open window, a Vera Lynn from the year before. We'll meet again, recorded in London, sent over by the BBC for shortwave rebroadcast. The kitchen smelled of pork shoulder cooking slow with cabbage. There was the Friday casserole. There was the kitchen on Ballard Street where there was no telegram from the Navy yet. Not yet. That was tomorrow's kitchen, or Monday's, or a Tuesday 7 days from now. Lucy washed her hands again in the upstairs bathroom. The Boraxo at the company sink had not been enough. The Boraxo here was not enough either. Aluminum filings went into the cracks of the skin, and they stayed there. She had read in the Ladies' Home Journal that a woman could get them out with Crisco worked into the skin overnight, but the Crisco was on the ration list, and Mrs. Brenneman used hers for the Friday casserole. The aluminum stayed in the cracks. The aluminum was going to stay in the cracks of the hands of the women of Willow Run forever, even 30 and 40 years later, when the granddaughters held their grandmother's hands and asked what those small, dark dots were under the skin. She put on the cotton house dress. She came down for the casserole. She did not eat. Mrs. Brenneman did not say anything about her not eating. The radio was tuned to the 6:45 Lowell Thomas News on the Blue Network, that flat news voice from a man in a New York studio who had been in the Khyber Pass once and never let you forget it. Later that evening, the Bob Hope Pepsodent show came on NBC, which Lucy did not listen to. After Hope came Glenn Miller again, from somewhere. These days they recorded Miller in advance and rebroadcast him from the Army Air Forces band. And Lucy heard the trumpet section come down on Moonlight Serenade, exactly as she had heard them come down on it at the cafeteria at 12:30. And she sat very still on the parlor sofa with a saucer of unfinished apple and margarine on her knee, and she felt the long thought begin to come. The long thought has teeth, Ruby Lofton had said. The long thought is what eats you, but you cannot put it off forever. You can put it off through the klaxon at 6:31. You can put it off through the matron's room at 10. You can put it off through the cafeteria at 12:30 and the long bay at 2:40 and the bomber bus at 3:22 and the lima beans and the Vera Lynn record. You can put it off until 8:14 in the evening of the 9th of September, 1943, in the parlor of a boarding house in Ypsilanti, Michigan, with the trumpets of Glenn Miller coming down soft from the Philco radio. And then the long thought arrives. and the long thought asks its question. And the question is, what if the letter does not come? She went upstairs at 8:15. She sat on the cot. She took the letter out of the envelope, the letter from the 12th of August. Wendell's handwriting, careful, schoolboy, the way the men of Bedford County learned to write at the McMinnville Academy in 1921. The letter ran 2 pages, and it said the things Wendell always said. He had been promoted to RM second. The Honolulu had sent over ice cream. He had read a Zane Grey paperback. His shipmate from Tennessee, a man named Avery from outside Cookville, had been on the bridge during one of the actions and had come back to the wireless shack and not spoken for 3